want to share some stories about Manannán with you. Versions of these are found in both Scottish and Irish folklore. Lady Gregory included them in her book Gods and Fighting Men under the title of Manannán at Play. You can also read these tales in another collection called the Silva Gadelica that was translated by Standish O'Grady in the late 19th century. Still other versions were collected in Iarla and Gerlach by John Francis Campbell, who included them in his popular Tales of the West Highlands. Manannán has a very rich complex of myth and folklore. Some people call Manannán a trickster, and these stories will show you why, but that label might lead you to think that he must be a bit like the Norse Loki or the Native American coyote. And I don't really see him being much like either of them. His tricks and illusions usually aim to teach us something, and whatever harm he does, he reverses once he's made his point. What do you think the point of these stories might be? The story generally goes by the name of O'Donnell's Kern, or the Kern in the narrow stripes. Kern is a word which describes a low, loutish foot soldier, or a yokel. In Gaelic the word is Cairnach, but I've yet to find it in a dictionary. I love the way the tales mix the mythical Manannán with actual historical characters, like the 16th century Donegal leader Red Hugh O'Donnell. Now Black Hugh O'Donnell was one time holding court and feasting in Ballyshannon. He had laid on the best meat and the best drink, and everyone was full of joy. The entertainment they had of harpers and poets was also of the best quality. The four greatest of these were Red Conan O'Rafferty, Dermot O'Gallaghan, Cormac O'Kerrigan, and Teigue O Kelly. And everyone thought their music the finest that they had ever heard, or were ever likely to, so great was their skill. And just as there was a lull in the entertainment, one of O'Donnell's men leant across the table to compliment his chieftain on the greatness of his harpers, when they looked up to see a strange character approaching them. He wore baggy trousers decorated with narrow stripes, and there was water squelching from his sodden shoes. With an old shawl over his head and his 2 ears sticking out at the sides of it, he looked foolish indeed. He wore a sword far too big for him, which protruded from its scabbard, and he carried several primitive spears for good measure. "Good day to you, O'Donnell," he said. "And to yourself," said O'Donnell. "Where did you come from?" "Oh," said the Kern, "I've been about. A day in Iarla, a day in Kintyre, another on the Isle of Man, and then a day in Rathlin. A fair get about, you know, and today I'm all yours." "Send for the gatekeeper," roared O'Donnell. And when the gatekeeper had been summoned, O'Donnell said, "What were ye thinking, man, to let this dirty busker into my court?" "But I never let him in," said the gatekeeper. "I've never seen him before at all." And O'Donnell set about the gatekeeper, berating him and threatening him with all sorts of terrible punishments. Now the Kern put in a word. "Don't be so hard on your gatekeeper, for I came in myself with ease, just as I will leave again, when I take the notion." "Sit down," ordered O'Donnell, wondering what sort of fellow this was. "I'll sit or stand to suit myself," said the Kern, and everyone stared at him. "Now give us a tune, you harpers. Let's see whether you're any good." So the harpers played one by one, then all together, and their music was as sweet as before. "What a racket," said the Kern when they'd all finished. "I never heard the like. Surely they learned that art in hell itself." And with that he took up a harp and played the most exquisite music. It brought joy, it brought weeping, and finally the sweetest slumber on all who heard it. "That was fine music indeed," said O'Donnell, "like the music of the fairy folk when they're in the she-mounds." The master of ceremonies bade the Kern go up and sit at the top table with O'Donnell himself. "I will not," said the Kern. "I'll stay here on this wee bench where I am, rather than go up there and be the butt of jokes." So the servants offered him a new suit of clothes to wear, in the style of his old ones, but he refused, saying he didn't want to be teased about his appearance. So O'Donnell, seeing that he couldn't buy this fine minstrel with flattery and gifts, decided to make him a prisoner. He set 20 guards to surround the cairn, and 20 more in the courtyard to watch the gate so that he could not leave. "I'll not be dining with you tomorrow, O Donnell," said the cairn, "for I've a mind to go and see Shane iarla at Manannán." "Don't even bother to try," sneered one of the guards, fingering his battle-axe. So the cairn picked up a harp once more and began to play, and he soon had everyone lulled to sleep with the beauty of it. Then the cairn cried out, "Wake up, guards, for I'm going now!" Well, they all awoke in great confusion and swung their axes and swords like fools and slayed one another. And when they were all dead, the stranger called for the gatekeeper, who O'Donnell had insulted, and said to him, "Go and tell O'Donnell that you have the means to bring these fools back to life, but that your price to do so is 20 cows and 100 acres of land." And the gatekeeper made his bargain with O'Donnell, and using a herb the stranger had given him, brought the men back to life, and received his reward. And O'Donnell had his comeuppance. Now when the stranger came to the rath of Shane iarla, he came again in his striped trousers, with the water sloshing from his shoes, and his 2 lugs sticking out from the shawl on his head. And he was still wearing the overlarge sword and carrying his childish spears. And iarla was also at the feasting, but as it was nice weather, they had taken the tables outdoors. iarla greeted the stranger and asked him where he had come from. "Och, I've been at the court of Black Hugh O'Donnell," he said, "and before that I was going about Dalriada in Scotland." "And what name do you have on you?" said iarla. "Duartane, O Duartane," replied the stranger, which might be translated as son of a rainstorm. So the stranger was shown hospitality, had his feet washed, although having him dried might have been more appropriate, and after a good stiff drink he laid down and went to sleep. The next day iarla greeted him and said that he'd heard he had skill as a poet and harper and man of letters. "Oh, yes, I'm very good at all that sort of thing, it is true," said O Duartane. So a book was fetched, for iarla wished to hear its contents read to him, but the stranger only stammered and peered at it. So a harp was fetched. He could only pretend to play. Then iarla began to satirize the stranger and make fun of him. At once Duartane snatched up the book and read from it with a melodious voice and a most charming cadence. Then he took up the harp and entertained them for a good hour with selections of his finest tunes. "That was sweet entertainment indeed," cried iarla. "One day I am sweet, another day I am sour," replied the stranger. "Come, let us take a walk," said iarla, "and I'll show you my lands." And so they went walking about Manannán, with iarla pointing out the sights, and he asked O Duartane whether he'd ever visited the place before. "Oh, yes," said the stranger. "I was here among the greatest poets and hunters and warriors that Ireland has ever known. And if you don't know who I mean Finn MacCool himself, and Oisin and all the Fina." And iarla listened to this tale with wonder, as he gazed into the distance at his lands. But when he turned to question the stranger, he was nowhere to be seen. Now there were many other adventures that the cairn had as he travelled through Ireland. In Leinster he acted as healer to Maciochi the poet, and after that he went cattle raiding with O'Connor in Sligo. Finally he came to the house of a wealthy lord called Teigue O Kelly. O Kelly saw him coming with the water squelching from his shoes and his ridiculous striped trousers and the ragged shawl covering his ears. They greeted one another, and O Kelly asked him his business. "Oh, he's a travelling man I am," said the stranger. "I have been in Iarla and Man, and round and about Dalriada, and up and down the land of Ireland. Just now I am coming from Sligo." "And what is your trade?" asked O Kelly. "I am a conjurer of tricks, and for 5 marks I will show you and your friends a very good one, for I can place 3 rushes on the palm of my hand, and when I blow on them with all my might, sure only the middle one will be blown away." O Kelly handed over the coins. So the stranger produced 3 rushes, such as were used for lamp wicks, from his bag. He carefully placed them on the palm of his hand, and then he curled his 2 fingers back, and held the 2 outside wicks down with his fingertips. Of course, only the middle rush blew away. Well, O Kelly knew when he'd been had and just laughed. But one of his men wasn't having it. "I can do such a trick easily," he said, "and will I also receive 5 marks?" "Fair play," said the stranger. "I will give you half my coins if you can do the same trick." Well, the chap took rushes and laid them on his palm, and curled his fingers round to hold the 2 of them in place. And if he did, the tips of his fingers went clean through the skin of his hand and out through the back of it. "Ah!" cried the stranger, "what have you done to me?" "Oh, not to worry," said the stranger. "I will put it right for you." And he took some herbs from his bag and made the man's hand as good as ever it was. "I have another trick," said the stranger, "and the price is the same if you'd like to see it." O Kelly went into his purse and gave him another 5 marks. "What can you do this time?" said he. "I can wiggle one of my ears without the other one moving at all." And with that the stranger reached up his hand and wagged one ear about. This was too much for one of the other men, who said, "I don't suppose you'll pay me for a trick, O Kelly." "Let's see your trick," said the stranger. Well, the man pulled a face at the Kern and reached up to waggle his ear, but when he did, it came clean off in his hand, leaving a bloody wound. "Look what that fellow's done to me!" he cried. But just as before, the stranger took herbs and set his ear back on, just as it was. "Have you got any other sort of trick?" said O Kelly. "I'll give 10 marks for your best one." And with that, the stranger took a long piece of silken thread from his bag. He cast one end up into the air and looped it fast to a cloud. Then he took a tiny hare from his bag and sent it running up the thread. Next he took out a little dog and sent it after the hare. Then a tiny young huntsman to follow after the dog. They all went running up the thread, and the stranger took out a lass out of a separate bag and said to her, "Go after the lad and tell him not to let the dog kill the hare," and off she went after them. O Kelly laughed to hear the dog in full cry and the boy blowing his horn, but soon they were far away and everyone fell silent. "Oh, I do not like the sound of this at all," said the stranger. "I am afraid they're up to no good up there." "What do you mean?" said O Kelly. "Surely the dog has killed the hare and the lad is making love to the girl." He reeled in the thread, and this was indeed so. The dog was just gnawing the bones of the hare, and the girl close to losing her honour. "You untrustworthy lad," said the stranger, and he twisted the head clean off the boy. O Kelly was angry that murder had been done at his feast, and began to berate the stranger. "Well, if you feel that way, I will put it to rights," he said. And he popped the head back on the boy, but he didn't bother to get it on straight, so now the head was looking backward and off to the side. "It would have been better to leave him be than that," said O Kelly. "Well, if you feel that way, I'll straighten him out," said the stranger, and he gave the head a twist until it was back to normal. O Kelly laughed, and when he looked around, the stranger was not to be seen. But it wasn't long until the Kern came to the house of the King of Leinster. If he didn't look as bad as ever, then he looked worse. And when they asked him where he'd come from, he spared no detail of his exploits. At last he drew breath, and the king said, "And what is your name?" "They call me the Gillijacker," he said, "the troublesome servant." In spite of the unpromising beginning, the king showed him proper hospitality. He called his 12 harpers to come and entertain them. Well, the stranger squirmed and wriggled and covered his ears, and finally he began to satirize the musicians for their lack of skill. At this, one of them drew his sword and made to strike a blow at the crown of the Gillijacker's head, but somehow the blow fell amiss and he sliced his own head in 2 instead. At this, all the musicians went into an uproar and made to attack the stranger with knives and swords, but every blow they struck fell on themselves or their fellows until they all soon lay dead. The king called for his guards and ordered them to take the stranger out into the yard and hang him. They seized him and had him on the gallows in an instant. They left the Gillijacker to swing there, but when they returned to the feast, he was there before them. "Did we not just hang you?" they asked. "He had best go and check," said the stranger, and when they went and looked, they found a well-liked member of their own company hanging there dead. They seized the stranger again, but twice more the same thing happened, till the king ordered them to stop, lest the whole company was destroyed. After that, they were afraid to touch the fellow and let him have his ease. The next day, The Gilligecker came to the king and said, "I slew many of your men yesterday, but today I will put them all to rights." And he went out to each of the dead and placed magic herbs inside their mouths, and they became healthy and alive again, just as before. Now once again the Gilligecker took up a harp and played the sweetest music and lulled them all, so that they never knew when he left or where he went after that. But I have it on good authority that he went next to the house of O Donnellan, and there he was welcomed with a mither of bonnyclaver and a dish of crab apples, which he greatly enjoyed. And this is how Manannán used to make the circuit of all his lands. And it was a wise king indeed who knew how to show him proper hospitality. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon for helping make these videos possible. Please consider becoming my patron for access to exclusive videos and other content. Thanks for watching.